The first thing I noticed was the headache. Not the kind you get after a bad night of sleep or too much beer at a backyard cookout. This was the kind that made me feel like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the back of my skull, and then, just for fun, did it again. My eyes were open, but everything was too bright, too white, too loud, even though the room was mostly quiet. Then I heard her. Debbie was sitting on my left side, crying. Not the delicate kind of crying either. This was full body sobbing, the kind where your shoulders shake and you can't catch your breath. She was holding my hand with both of hers, squeezing like she was afraid I was going to float away. Then on my right side, I heard a sharp, controlled breathing that I recognized immediately. I turned my head, which was a mistake because the room tilted, and there was my daughter Lindsay, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes red but burning with something that wasn't sadness. That was fury. Pure, barely contained fury. I looked up at the ceiling and thought, okay, Les, you're in a hospital. That much was obvious. And then, slowly, like a film reel catching up with itself, I remembered everything. I remember being so angry that my hand was shaking. I remembered raising my voice, which I almost never do. I remembered a fist coming at me from somewhere to my left, the floor rushing up to meet me, and then nothing. Just dark, quiet nothing. I kissed the floor of my own house, and I didn't even get a say in it. My name is Lester Dawson. Most people call me Les. And if you want to understand why I was lying in that hospital bed with a splitting headache, a sobbing wife on one side, and a daughter who looked like she was mentally drafting a criminal complaint on the other, well, I'm going to have to take you back a little bit. I'm 55 years old. I run a small plumbing company here in Florida, and business is good. People never stop plugging up their toilets. I don't care what the economy does, what the stock market does, what politicians argue about on television. Toilets will always get clogged, and Les Dawson will always show up and fix it. It's not glamorous, but it's honest and it pays well, and I have zero complaints. Now my wife, Deborah Dawson, Debbie for short, 53 years old, and still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen first thing in the morning, which is saying something because she will be the first to tell you she is not a morning person. Debbie is a housewife, and she is extraordinary at it. The house is always clean, always warm, always smells like something good is happening in the kitchen, and the woman can cook. Lord, can she cook. Her pot roast is the reason I married her. I mean that literally. We have one daughter, Lindsay. She's 28, sharp as a tack, career-driven, still single by choice, and she sells houses for a living. She is, without question, the best thing Debbie and I ever did. And as it happens, she's the reason we bought our current house. Now let me tell you about that house, because it matters. My dream was simple. I wanted a property somewhere near the St. Johns River. Fish whenever I wanted, maybe sit on a dock in the evening with a cold drink and watch the water. That was the entire dream. Nothing extravagant. Just me, a fishing rod, and a little peace and quiet. What I got was a 4-bedroom suburban home in a nice neighborhood, about 45 minutes from any body of water worth fishing in. It has a spectacular kitchen with a big island that Debbie nearly wept over, and a walk-in closet that she describes as life-changing. Lindsay found it for us, and Debbie fell in love with it on the first walkthrough. I looked at my wife's face when she saw that kitchen. I mean, really saw it. Her eyes lit up like Christmas, and I thought, you know what, Les? The river will be there. That dream isn't going anywhere. Happy wife, happy life. I've always believed that. So I signed the papers, shook Lindsay's hand, and said goodbye to my fishing dock dream. Maybe someday. We moved in, got settled, and for a while things were genuinely good. Debbie was in her element. I'd come home from a long day of fixing people's plumbing disasters, and the house would smell like dinner, and she'd be happy, and that made me happy. That's how it's supposed to work. And then one evening, I pulled into the driveway after a particularly long day, and I saw a car parked outside that I recognized. And my stomach dropped. I knew that car. That was Stacy's car. Debbie's younger sister, Stacy, 37 years old and still, as far as I could tell, actively in the process of finding herself. I never liked Stacy. That's not something I'm ashamed to admit because I tried, genuinely tried, to like her in the early years. But Stacy is what I would politely describe as a handful and what I would impolitely describe as a walking, talking disaster in human form. She gossiped about everyone, including Debbie and me, and not harmless gossip either, the kind that caused actual problems that took actual time to sort out. She was messy. She was loud. She had no concept of boundaries or consideration for other people. She had never, in all the years I'd known her, held a steady job or lived on her own without someone else carrying the weight. I sat in my truck for a moment, just breathed. Then I went inside to find out what I was walking into. I walked through the front door and stopped. Boxes, luggage, a whole collection of it, stacked and scattered across my living room like someone had detonated a suitcase in the middle of my house. Big boxes, small boxes, a couple of garbage bags stuffed to capacity, and what appeared to be an entire vanity's worth of skincare products lined up along my entryway wall. Oh, hell no. She's moving in. I set my keys down very carefully on the counter, the way a man does when he is choosing not to throw them, and I called out in the calmest voice I could manage. "Debbie, dear," I said, "a word, please." There was a pause from the kitchen, the sound of something being set down on the counter, and then Debbie emerged, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had the look on her face. I know that look. It's the look she gets when she's already prepared her argument, and she's hoping the conversation stays calm enough for her to deliver it. "Oh, Les, you're home," she said, and then she took a breath. "Hey, look, I'm sorry about all this, but Stacy needs family right now." "What the heck is going on?" I asked, and that's when Debbie told me. Shane, Stacy's husband, had finally had enough. He'd kicked her out. They were divorcing. Stacy had nowhere to go, and she'd called Debbie that morning, and Debbie had told her to come. That morning. She'd called that morning, and by the time I came home from work, my living room looked like a storage unit. I rubbed the back of my neck and looked at my wife. "Deb," I said, keeping my voice level, "why didn't you tell me about this first? You know I have opinions about Stacy. How long is she going to be here? A week?" Debbie started to answer, but I was already looking around at the sheer volume of stuff crowding my living room. Boxes with labels on them. A clothing rack. What appeared to be an entire box dedicated solely to throw pillows. This did not look like a week. This looked like Stacy had packed up her entire existence and relocated it to my house. This looked permanent. This looked like a plugged-up drain, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just quietly backs up until one day you're standing in 2 inches of water wondering where it all went wrong. I fix those for a living. I know exactly how they end. Debbie was still talking, explaining, saying words about family and need, and just until she gets back on her feet, but I was still staring at the throw pillow box trying to find my calm. "Which room is she in?" I asked, and right on cue, I heard the sound of footsteps coming down the hall from the direction of Lindsay's bedroom. And then Stacy appeared, holding a small decorative mirror and looking very comfortable for someone who had supposedly just survived a personal crisis. She gave me a smile. "Hey, Les." I looked past her to the open door of Lindsay's room and felt something behind my left. I started to twitch. "That's my daughter's room," I said. "That room is off limits." Stacy tilted her head like I'd said something mildly puzzling. "But Lindsay doesn't live here anymore." I looked at her for a moment. "And you don't live here either," I said. "You're a guest. Guests stay in the guest bedroom. That room belongs to my daughter, and nothing in it gets touched." Stacy opened her mouth. "Guest bedroom, Stacy," I said. "That's the deal." I picked up my keys from the counter and walked to our bedroom to change out of my work clothes, and behind me, I could hear Debbie quietly redirecting her sister down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for a minute. 1 week, I told myself. It'll be 1 week. I really should have known better. I did not eat dinner that night. I know myself well enough to know when I need to remove myself from a situation before I say something I can't take back. And sitting across the dinner table from Stacy on her first night in my house, after coming home to a living room full of boxes I was never consulted about, was not a situation where I trusted my mouth. So I told Debbie I wasn't hungry, which was a lie, and I went and sat in the backyard with a glass of water and stared at the neighbor's fence until I felt like a human being again. The disrespect of it was what got me. I'm not a complicated man. I don't ask for much. I go to work, I fix people's problems, I come home, I want peace. That's the whole list. And to come home and find that a major decision about my own household had been made without so much as a phone call. I didn't even get a text. That sat in my chest like stone. I'd never been disrespected like that before. And the honest truth was I didn't quite know what to do with it. I'm not a yeller. I'm not a man who flips tables or storms around slamming doors. So I just sat outside in the dark, too angry to eat, too tired to fight, and I thought about Aunt Edna. Now, if you want to understand what I was dealing with, let me tell you about Aunt Edna. Aunt Edna was my late mother-in-law's sister. Lovely woman, patient woman, the kind of woman who had been through enough in her life that very little rattled her anymore. Years ago, before I really understood the full scope of what Stacy was capable of, Stacy had gone through a rough patch, which looking back was simply a Tuesday for Stacy, and ended up staying with Aunt Edna for a stretch of time. Aunt Edna nearly had a heart attack. I'm not being dramatic. The woman was found by her neighbor sitting on her front porch at 2 in the morning because Stacy had been playing music so loud inside the house that Aunt Edna couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't hear herself breathe. The mess alone apparently took over 3 rooms. And then there was the incident with the stove. Stacy left something on, forgot about it completely, and a small fire started in the kitchen. Nothing burned down, thank God, but Aunt Edna stood there watching the smoke and apparently made a decision right then and there. She threw Stacy's bags on the front porch the next morning. All of them. And here's the thing, she was not the only one. Most of Debbie's family, when they heard Stacy was coming, suddenly had somewhere else to be. A prior commitment, a trip they'd forgotten about, a health condition that required rest and quiet. They loved Stacy from a distance, which I now understood was the only safe way to love Stacy. They all knew. Every single one of them knew exactly what she was, and they had all, at various points, made the completely rational decision to keep her at arm's length. And here was my Debbie, sweet, loyal, good-hearted Debbie, the one person in the family who couldn't say no to her little sister, the one who still believed that family means you show up no matter what. I love that about her, I did. That big heart of hers was one of the reasons I married her. Sitting in the backyard that night, I just wished it wasn't aimed in Stacy's direction. I told myself it would be fine. 1 week, maybe 2. Stacy would get bored or get on someone's nerves enough to move along. That's what she did. That was the pattern. Oh, and those boxes and trash bag from day one? Still there. Still sitting in the hallway months later, gathering dust like monuments to my suffering. I had offered, more than once, to help move them to the garage or at least into her room so we could have her hallway back. I'll do it, Stacy would say. She never did it. Debbie would look at me apologetically and say, sorry, Les, she's still settling in. Settling in. 8 months, and she was still settling in. At that rate, she'd be fully settled in by the time I retired. I brought up charging her rent exactly once. I sat Debbie down, calmly and reasonably, and explained that Stacy had been here for months. She was using our utilities, eating our food, and contributing exactly nothing to the household. Debbie looked at me like I'd suggested we charge a golden retriever rent. Les, no. She's family. I'm not doing that. That was a fight. Not our worst, but not our best either. And it set the pattern for what the next several months would look like. Me raising a concern, Debbie defending her sister, nobody winning, and Stacy in the next room completely unaware that any of this was happening because she had her music up too loud to hear us anyway. I told Debbie once, quietly, that if she didn't ask her sister to find another place, then I would be the one finding another place. I meant it when I said it. Debbie cried, and that right there is my kryptonite. I cannot watch my wife cry. I never could. 30 years, and those tears still get me every single time. So I backed down, and Stacy stayed, and the boxes kept gathering dust in the hallway. Now, Lindsay knew. She found out the way she found out most things. A FaceTime call one evening where she could hear music thumping in the background loud enough to rattle the phone speaker. Let me guess, she said, narrowing her eyes at the screen. Aunt Stacy is there, isn't she? It wasn't even a question. She's just staying temporarily while she looks for a place, Debbie said, doing her best to sound breezy. Lindsay looked directly at me through the screen. I was standing just behind Debbie's shoulder, and I shook my head slowly, the universal signal for do not believe a word of that. Lindsay saw it. Mom, she said, make her leave. Please. Remember what she did to Grandma Edna? She can't stay with us. Same answer. Same song. Debbie believed in her sister, and that was that. So Lindsay decided to come see for herself. She showed up on a Saturday morning, and I watched my daughter walk through the front door and just stop. She stood in the entryway and turned her head slowly, taking in the full picture. The boxes still stacked in the hallway. The trash bags slumped against the wall, so old now that whatever was inside them was anyone's guess, probably expired by this point, knowing Stacy. The layer of general chaos that had settled over the common areas like weather. Then Stacy came out of her room and had the absolute nerve to look at my daughter and say, "Oh, what are you doing here?" She asked. I want you to sit with that for a moment. In my daughter's parents' house, the house that my daughter, a real estate professional, helped us find. Stacy looked at Lindsay like she was the unexpected guest. Fortunately, Lindsay has my late mother's tongue. Sharp, quick, and completely unapologetic. "I'm here because this is my parents' house, and I have every right to be here," Lindsay said, matching Stacy's tone perfectly. "You? What are you doing here?" Stacy blinked. Lindsay was already moving past her, eyes scanning the hallway. "Mom, what are these boxes still doing here? They're taking up half the hallway." She looked toward the common bathroom, and her face changed. "Oh my God, why does it smell like a public restroom in there?" "Lindsay, please, don't be disrespectful," Debbie said, coming in from the kitchen. She said, "She's your aunt. She's a grown adult who is old enough to know you don't mess up someone else's house," Lindsay said, not lowering her voice even slightly. Stacy naturally looked wounded, hand to the chest, eyes going soft, the full performance. The woman could pivot to victim faster than anyone I had ever met. It was honestly impressive in the most exhausting possible way. I stood in the doorway to the kitchen, watching all of this unfold, and said nothing. Not because I didn't have thoughts. I had many, many thoughts. But for the first time in 8 months, someone else was saying them out loud, and I was going to let her finish. That was my daughter, and I have never been more proud of her in my life. But days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months. And somewhere around month 3, I stopped counting because counting made it worse. The chaos was not dramatic in the way you might picture. It wasn't one big explosion. It was 1,000 small things, every single day, grinding away at the quiet life I had worked 30 years to build. Dishes left in the sink overnight, every night. Music at volumes that rattled the cabinet doors. Her things spreading slowly from her bedroom into the hallway, then into the living room, then onto the kitchen counter like a slow tide that never went back out. Friends I'd never met coming over without notice. Phone calls on speaker at 11 at night. The bathroom she used looking like a tornado had developed a skincare routine. I would come home from a full day of fixing other people's messes and walk into my own house and just stand in the doorway for a moment, bracing myself. Debbie cleaned up after her. That was the part that really got me. My wife, who had enough to do running this household, was quietly following her grown 37-year-old sister around, picking up her dishes and wiping down her counters and washing her towels. And if Debbie said anything, Stacy would get defensive, or she'd say sorry in that way that meant absolutely nothing, and then do the exact same thing 20 minutes later. 8 months. 8 months of this. And then Logan showed up. I want to tell you about the day everything changed. And I want to start by saying that by month 8, I had developed a system. I came home from work, I assessed the situation at the front door before fully committing to entering. I found Debbie, I kissed her hello, and I went straight to the backyard with whatever I was drinking that evening, and I sat in my chair, and I decompressed for exactly as long as I needed to before I could be a pleasant person again. It wasn't a perfect system, but it kept the peace, and it kept me from saying things I couldn't unsay. That system worked right up until the evening I pulled into my driveway and saw a truck parked outside that I didn't recognize. I sat in my car for a moment. A truck, packed full. I could see it from the driveway, bags in the truck bed, boxes visible through the rear window, a laundry basket wedged against the passenger seat. That was not a visiting truck. That was a moving truck. So I went inside. There was a man I had never seen before standing in my living room. Tall, maybe late 30s, backwards cap, looking extremely comfortable for someone who had no reason to be comfortable in my house. He was moving a box through the hallway, past Stacy's original boxes that were still there, still gathering dust, now with company. And he set it down near the wall and then turned and saw me. "Hey man," he said. I looked at him. I looked at the box. I looked at Stacy, who had appeared from the hallway with a smile that told me she had absolutely prepared for this moment and decided the best strategy was confidence. Les, she said, this is Logan. He's going to be staying here for a little while. Just temporarily. I heard the word temporarily, and something behind my eyes went very still. Stacy, I said, and my voice was quiet, which anyone who knows me will tell you is not a good sign. Who gave you permission to bring someone into this house? She waved her hand. Deborah said it was fine. I turned around. Debbie was standing in the kitchen doorway, and the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. I did not say that, Debbie said. I said no such thing. Stacy's eyes went wide with a very convincing performance of innocence. Deb, you said. I said I would think about it, Debbie said, and her voice had an edge I hadn't heard in a while. I never said yes. Well, I needed somewhere for him to go. His wife kicked him out. Stacy started. His wife, I said. The room went quiet. I looked at Logan, who had the good sense to look at least mildly uncomfortable. Then I looked back at Stacy. You brought your boyfriend, I said slowly, who was just kicked out by his wife, into my house without asking me, without asking Debbie, and your plan was to just present this as a done deal and see if we went along with it. Stacy lifted her chin. Logan needed somewhere to go, and I needed support, and you have the room. This is not a shelter, Stacy. I said, this is my house. My name is on the deed, and you do not get to make decisions about who lives here. Debbie is my sister, and I am her husband, I said, and I felt something I'd been holding down for 8 months starting to rise. I have been patient. I have been quiet. I let you move in without a real answer about when you were leaving. I did not charge you rent when I should have. I watched my wife clean up after you for 8 months without saying half of what I wanted to say. But you do not get to bring a stranger into this house and tell me Debbie approved it when she is standing right there telling you she didn't. Stacy stared at me. Then her face crumpled, right on schedule, into that wounded expression she kept in her back pocket for exactly these moments. I can't believe you're being like this, she said, her voice going soft and fragile. I'm going through a hard time, Les. I just needed. Stacy. I said, no. My answer is no. Logan shifted his weight in the corner. Debbie had her arms crossed and was staring at her sister with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not quite anger. Something colder than that. Like something was finally, slowly, becoming clear to her. He needs to go, I said, tonight. And Stacy, you and I are going to sit down this week and talk about a real timeline for when you are moving out. This cannot continue. Stacy opened her mouth, and Logan, who had been quiet this whole time, who should have stayed quiet, who had every reason in the world to stay quiet. Logan stepped forward. Hey, he said, and his voice had an edge to it now. Back off her. I turned and looked at him. Excuse me. I said, you heard me, he said. She's upset. Back off. I want to be very clear about what happened next, because I have replayed it many times from that hospital bed. I did not move toward him. I did not raise my hand. I pointed at the front door and I told him very clearly that he needed to get his boxes, get in his truck, and leave my property. And Logan swung at me. I didn't see it coming. 1 second, I was standing in my own living room, pointing at my own front door, and the next second, there was an explosion of pain across my left cheek, and the floor was coming up to meet me fast, and I didn't have time to do anything about it. The back of my head hit the floor, and then there was nothing, just dark, just quiet. The last thing I heard before the lights went out was Debbie screaming. They told me later that I was out for 3 days. 3 days. 72 hours of nothing while my wife sat in a hospital chair and my daughter drove 90 miles an hour to get to me. 3 days of scans and monitoring and doctors using words like traumatic brain injury and intracranial pressure. And we need to watch him carefully, which are not words you want associated with your husband and father. I didn't know any of that at the time, of course. I was somewhere quiet, and then I wasn't. The first thing was a headache. That sledgehammer behind my skull that I told you about at the very beginning of this story. The white ceiling. The 2 bright lights. The sound of my wife crying before I even fully understood where I was. I turned my head to the left, which cost me, and there was Debbie. Both hands wrapped around mine, shoulders shaking tears running down her face in a way that told me she had been crying for a long time before I woke up. Not fresh crying, exhausted crying, the kind that comes after days of it. Then I turned my head to the right, which cost me more, and there was Lindsay, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes red but burning. She looked like she hadn't slept. She probably hadn't. "Dad," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly before she locked it back down. "Hey, baby," I said. My voice came out like gravel. Debbie made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and squeezed my hand harder. I lay there for a moment, looking up at the ceiling, taking inventory. Head, cheek, the slow, dawning understanding of where I was and how I'd gotten here. "How long?" I said. 3 days less, Debbie whispered. 3 days. I closed my eyes. Wow, 3 days. 3 days because a man I had never met before that evening decided that my living room was a good place to throw a punch. 3 days because my sister-in-law had treated my home like a hotel and my wife like a safety net and my patience like it had no bottom. I felt Debbie's hand tightening around mine, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "Les, I'm so sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have made her leave months ago. I should have. Where is she?" I said. Silence. Where is Stacy, Deborah? I said. More silence. The kind that answers the question before anyone speaks. "She's at the house," Lindsay said, and her voice was flat and controlled in the way it gets when she is genuinely furious. "She's still at the house. Still acting like everyone is mean to her." I looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "And Logan?" I said. "Gone," Lindsay said. "He ran. The second you hit the floor, he panicked and ran out the front door. Mom called 911. The police came. They're looking for him." I nodded slowly, which was a mistake because the room tilted. "And Stacy?" I said. "What did Stacy do?" Another silence, the kind with a shape to it. Lindsay exhaled through her nose. "She told the police that you got in Logan's face and he panicked. She said that it was basically an accident, that you provoked him." I let that sit there for a moment. I provoked him. I pointed at my own front door in my own house, and apparently that was provocation. I had been lying unconscious on my living room floor for however long it took the ambulance to arrive, and Stacy's contribution to the situation was to make sure the narrative was shaped correctly before I woke up to give my own account. Zero remorse. Not a flicker of it. She had watched me hit that floor, and her first instinct was to protect herself. I looked at Debbie. My wife was not looking at me the way she had been looking at me for 8 months when this subject came up. She wasn't preparing an argument. She wasn't defending anyone. She was just looking at me with those red, exhausted eyes. And for the first time since Stacy's boxes showed up in my hallway, she looked like a woman who had finally, completely seen something clearly. "Debbie," I said, and my voice was quiet and tired, and I meant every word of it. "I love you. 30 years, and I would do all of it again. But when I get out of this hospital, she is gone. Her, and every box, and every trash bag, and every shampoo bottle. All of it. Gone." Debbie nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded. "And if she's not gone," I said, "then I need you to think seriously about whether you want to sell that house, because I cannot go back to that." "She'll be gone," Debbie said. And something in the way she said it told me she meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything about Stacy in a very long time. Lindsay uncrossed her arms. She reached over and put her hand on my leg, and I looked at my daughter, this sharp, fearless, wonderful person that Debbie and I had somehow managed to raise together, and she gave me a look that said, "I've got you, Dad," without a single word. I closed my eyes again. The headache was still there, enormous and relentless. But underneath it, somewhere quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 months. Something that felt a lot like peace. The doctor kept me for 5 more days after I woke up. "Observation," he said. "With head injuries, you don't rush it." I didn't argue. Honestly, the hospital was the quietest I'd been in 8 months, so I wasn't in a tremendous hurry. Debbie barely left my side. She slept in that chair next to my bed both nights, which I told her she didn't have to do, and she told me to be quiet, which is how I knew she was going to be okay. Lindsay came and went, bringing food, handling things, making phone calls in the hallway in that brisk, efficient way of hers that reminded me she got things done the same way I did. quietly and completely. Nobody mentioned Stacy while I was in the hospital. I didn't ask. I was saving that for when I got home. When we pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment. Same house, same suburb, 45 minutes from any decent fishing. But it was my house and I had bled for it, literally, and I was ready to have it back. I walked through the front door slowly, Debbie's hand on my arm, and there were the boxes, still in the hallway. Of course they were. They had been there for 8 months, and nearly being responsible for killing your brother-in-law was apparently not enough of a motivation to move them. Stacy was on the couch. She looked up when I came in, and I want to tell you that I saw guilt on her face, or sorrow, or even just basic human discomfort at the sight of the man who had left her living room unconscious on a stretcher. I want to tell you that. She looked at me like I had inconvenienced her. "So," she said, and her voice had that familiar edge of someone who has been rehearsing. "You're back." I said nothing. I walked carefully to the armchair, and I sat down. "You know," she said, shifting on the couch, "if you hadn't gotten in Logan's face like that, none of this would have happened." I looked at her. He panicked. "You were aggressive, Les. You can't just back people into corners and not expect a reaction," she said. I kept looking at her. I had nothing to say to that. There are no words that adequately respond to that level of delusion, so I didn't try. It was Lindsay who responded. She came through the front door behind us, took one look at the scene, and walked straight to the hallway without a word. She picked up the nearest box, turned around, and carried it out the front door. Stacy was off the couch immediately. "Hey, what are you doing?" she said, her voice going sharp. "Put that down. What are you doing with my stuff?" Lindsay came back in, picked up another box, and walked back out. "Hey," Stacy said, louder now, "I will call the police. You can't touch my belongings. That is illegal." Lindsay set the box down on the front lawn, came back in, and picked up a trash bag. "Deborah," Stacy turned to her sister, pulling out the voice, the one that was equal parts outrage and wounded little sister. "Are you seeing this? Tell your daughter to stop. Tell her." And then Debbie came in from the hallway, carrying a box. Stacy went completely still. She watched her sister walk past her, out the front door, set the box on the lawn next to Lindsay's, and come back inside. Debbie didn't look at her when she passed. She went back to the hallway and picked up another one. "Deb." Stacy's voice had changed. The performance was slipping. "Deb, what are you doing? Stop, please." Debbie kept moving. "Deborah." Stacy stepped in front of her. "I am your sister. Your sister. You can't do this to me. I have nowhere to go." Debbie stopped. She looked at her sister. Really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you're done being blinded by love and loyalty and 30-something years of family obligation. She looked at her for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was very calm. "You almost ended my husband's life," Debbie said. "He was unconscious for 3 days, Stacy. 3 days. And the first thing you did was tell the police it was his fault." Stacy opened her mouth. "He has been patient with you for 8 months, Debbie said. "I have defended you for 8 months. I cleaned up after you. I made excuses for you. I chose you over my husband's peace of mind over and over again, and you stood in my living room and let your boyfriend put my husband in the hospital, and then you made yourself the victim." The room was quiet. "You need to leave, Stacy," Debbie said. "Right now. You get your things and you go. Or these boxes go to the dumpster at the end of the street, and you can figure out the rest." Stacy's eyes filled with tears. Her lip trembled. The full production. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she whispered. "After everything. I'm your family." "I know you are," Debbie said. "And I love you. But you do not get to do what you did to this family and stand in this house. Not anymore." Stacy looked at me. I think she was hoping for something. An intervention, maybe. Some last shred of the patience she had spent 8 months running down to nothing. I looked back at her, and I believe I was smiling widely, and said nothing. She looked at Lindsay, who was standing in the doorway with a trash bag in each hand and absolutely no expression on her face whatsoever. And finally, slowly, Stacy seemed to understand that there was no angle left to work. No sister to appeal to. No patience left to exploit. The performance wasn't going to save her this time. She went to her room. She came out 20 minutes later with a bag over her shoulder and her car keys in her hand. She walked through the living room without looking at any of us. At the front door, she stopped and for just a moment, I thought maybe she would say something real. Something human. Some small acknowledgement of what she had cost us. She looked at Debbie. "I hope you're happy," she said, and she walked out. Lindsay closed the door behind her. Quietly, firmly, without ceremony. The three of us stood there in the sudden, enormous silence of a house that was finally, after 8 months, just ours again. Debbie came and sat next to me on the armchair, tucking herself against my side the way she had for 30 years, and I put my arm around her carefully because my head still hurt and I was not about to push my luck. Lindsay looked around at the remaining boxes still in the hallway. "I'll get those to the garage," she said. "Thank you, baby." She nodded and got to work, and Debbie and I sat there together in the quiet, and I listened to my house settle around me. No music, no chaos, no strangers in the hallway. Just the sound of my daughter working and my wife breathing next to me. I looked at the window. Late afternoon light coming through the curtains. "Les," Debbie said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm really, truly sorry." I pulled her a little closer. "I know you are." We sat there a while longer, and I thought about the St. Johns River. About a dock. About a fishing rod and a cold drink, and an evening with nothing to do but watch the water. Someday I thought, that dream isn't going anywhere. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. Now, I did promise you this story had a payoff. And here it is. The police found Logan about 2 weeks after he ran out of my front door like the coward he turned out to be. You want to know where he was? In a sleazy motel somewhere, hiding out with Stacy. The man who punched me in my own living room and left me unconscious on the floor was holed up in a discount motel room with the woman whose chaos started all of this. Romantic, really. When the officer showed up, I was told that Stacy went completely unhinged, screaming that it wasn't Logan's fault, that I had provoked him, that the whole thing was being blown out of proportion, that Les started it, that nobody understood what they'd been through. The full concert. No opening act, straight to the headlining performance. It didn't help Logan any. He went to jail. Assault causing bodily harm in a man's own home with 3 witnesses tends to have consequences, funny enough. And I heard through the grapevine that his wife, the one who had kicked him out before any of this happened, laughed when she found out. Not a polite laugh either. A full, genuine, deeply satisfied laugh. Honestly, I respect that woman. As for Stacy, after the motel, she sort of just disappeared off the family radar for a while. And when word got around to the rest of Debbie's family about what had happened, the 8 months, the boxes, Logan, the hospital, you know what they said to Debbie? They said, "You knew the whole family wanted nothing to do with her near their homes. You knew what she was, and you didn't learn from any of us." They weren't wrong. And Debbie, to her credit, didn't argue with a single word of it. Even Stacy's own friends, the one she had been gossiping with and running around with all these years, wouldn't take her in. No family, no friends, no Logan, no safety net. And for the first time in her 37 years on this earth, Stacy was forced to do the one thing she had been successfully avoiding her entire adult life. She had to take care of herself. Last we heard, she found a job, an actual job, and she rented a small apartment somewhere. I don't know the details, and honestly, I don't need them. I wish her no harm. I just wish her very, very far away from my house. And me? I'm back at work. Unplugging plugged up toilets, fixing busted pipes, keeping Florida's plumbing situation under control one call out at a time. My head healed. My cheek healed. My house is clean and quiet and smells like Debbie's cooking again. Debbie is happier than I've seen her in a long time. I think carrying those boxes out to the lawn was the most freeing thing she'd done in years. She doesn't talk about Stacy much. When she does, it's with the kind of tired clarity that comes after you've finally stopped lying to yourself about someone you love. Lindsay is back in her own apartment, back to selling houses, back to being the most competent person in any room she walks into. She calls more often now. I think the whole thing scared her more than she let on at the time. And my house. My beautiful bedroom, big kitchen, walk-in closet, 45 minutes from a decent fishing spot house. Peaceful. Finally, completely, wonderfully peaceful. I still think about that dock on the St. Johns River sometimes. That dream of mine that got traded for a kitchen island and a walk-in closet. Maybe someday. Debbie did say sorry, after all. I'm keeping that in my back pocket for the right moment. All right, that's our story for today. Do you have a Stacy in your family? Someone who treats other people's homes like a hotel and their patience like it has no expiration date? I want to hear about it in the comments. Trust me, after what I just told you, nothing is going to shock me. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and welcome to Melodic Vengeance. If you've been here a while, you already know how we do things, consequences that are earned, stories that are real, and justice that actually lands. I'll see you on the next one. Take care of yourselves.
If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Don't forget to follow for more content just like this. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.